Welcome to Rewatch-and-Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Criminal Minds Season 2, Episode 6, The Boogeyman. Episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happens in the episode. So, in this episode, there's two plot lines. The first one is the criminal plot line, which is that in a small town, there are two young boys who have been killed, and so the team is called in. While they're on the flight, they are informed that a third victim, which is a little girl, is dead, which throws them off at first because it's a change in victimology, but they decide that it's the age that's more important rather than the gender, and so they then continue on with the investigation. When they arrive in town, they're brought to like the crime scenes, um, which they discover that it's not a dump site. Basically, the kids were lured into the woods and they were killed where they were found by someone who clearly knows the woods very well. Additionally, we see that the kids have a legend about an old house and an old man that lives in that house. So the team naturally, when one of the children is dared to go and ring the bell and goes missing, they go to the house to investigate. That is where they find out that the old man who's supposed to live there is gone. They do find the kid alive. He was just spooked by a tree branch and ended up hiding under the stairs until they found him. But inside they see that the same day's newspaper was delivered, that meals for the elderly have been delivered, and that the cream spinach was duct taped up, and there was an EpiPen, which becomes important because that's how they find the killer, through his dairy allergy. Um, then we had them finding the old man who's supposed to live in the house out in the woods, having died of natural causes while setting a trap for hunting. But he had been dead at least a week, which means that whoever was eating his meals had been squatting in his house. And they then, based on fingerprints, find the guidance counselor, James Charles, fingerprints on the food boxes. So they go to his house, see him running out of the house and with a red hat, the red hat that the second most recent victim had been wearing when he was dead. They also find souvenirs, a lunchbox from the first victim, a book bag from the third victim, and they then think, of course, he's the killer. However, when they learn about the EpiPen and the dairy allergy, Morgan, who has been doing the interview, is sent out. Gideon comes in. Gideon then offers him coffee with milk, which he has no problem taking, and this is what gives Gideon the information he needs to ask how long he's known his son was a killer who is also a child, so it was child on child crime in this case. And, then the dad breaks down and reveals that he just found the cap this morning, and his wife had recently left him, which they at first thought was his stressor, but actually was his son's stressor in this case. And while they're figuring this out, Jeffrey has taken Tracy Bell, one of the kids who was told this legend at the beginning, and because they were told to use the buddy system after she's abandoned by her buddy, he then offers to be her buddy and leads her through the park and into the woods before he starts chasing her with a bat. She then, of course, runs. He chases. Luckily, because they figured it out, they go to the bus stop, figure out where a kid would lead another kid, which is, of course, the park and then the woods behind it. So they go and search there and manage to get there in time before Tracy becomes the fourth victim. And when Gideon asks Jeffrey why he killed them, he just says because he wanted to. Secondary plot through this episode is Elle and Hotchner are not on this case because Elle from the last episode was cleared by the FBI as the killing being in self-defense, though we as the audience know better, and both Hotch and Gideon also know better. And he basically, Hotchner, as the team lead, orders her to have a psych evaluation. And instead of going to the psych evaluation, she throws out her cell phone, takes an overnight bag, and goes to her father's grave, which Aaron follows her to find out like what she's up to. And he basically says like, you've come here to, confess your sins. She ultimately doesn't admit to anything, but she notes that when she first got the job, she was always excited to get the call for a case, but since the incident happened where she was shot by the Fisher King, she has instead been terrified of getting a call to join the team, even though she's the one who pushed to return to work earlier than she was supposed to, but I digress. Um, and ultimately, she says that it's not a confession of anything, but she does hand in her resignation and asks Aaron to let the rest of the team know before leaving. And this is the last episode that we see Elle in as part of the team. And so that is the ending to this episode. So now that we've been reminded about what happened in the episode, time to rank the episode first on the mostly objective ranking list, followed by the personal ranking list. So first we have our single episode supporting character introductions. We have James Charles, who is the school guidance counselor who is, of course, trying to help the families and the children through this terrible time, giving them someone to talk to. And it ultimately turns out to be his son, Jeffrey Charles, who is the murderer in this episode. And of course, James is brought in first as thought to be the criminal because he's an adult and you would assume the killer would be an adult. But in fact, it ended up being his son Jeffrey, who's allergic to dairy, which is what ultimately ended up getting him caught. And good thing too, because they were able to save his last victim before he actually killed her. And then we have Chief Jones, who is their main contact with the police in this small town for the duration of the episode, who's often with them as they're going to the various crime scenes and interrogations, etc., etc. They're all worth 1 point each, bringing us to 3. Then we have the multi-episode supporting character introduction, and that's Tracy Bell. She does show up in one other episode within this season. So yeah, makes her 2 episodes worth 2 points. That brings us to 5. And then we have our multi-season main character development, which is basically everything that happens to Elle. So Elle is ordered to have a psych evaluation after being cleared by the FBI, which she then skips. She stops answering the calls, which leads to Hotchner basically following her to find out what she's doing, tracks her to her father's grave, where she goes to basically, I guess he thinks, confess her sins. They return to the office. She then quits. This is the last episode we see her in. As an aside, I didn't give points for it because it's just a minor fun fact, but we do learn that Reed is afraid of the dark, and JJ was afraid of the woods in the past. But apparently Reed is still afraid of the dark, which I think is fun. Well, adorable. But anyways, I'm not giving points for that because it is such, just like a minor fun fact that they threw in there. But yeah, with the development from L, that brings us all the way up to 9. However, there is a minus of 2 points because it was a semi-memorable episode. Once the episode got going, I recalled the episode and I remembered that it was probably Elle's last episode. But a lot of the details of the episode were pretty fuzzy. Like it wasn't, I didn't recall who had done it until very far into the episode. And up until she quit, I wasn't 100% sure if this episode or the next one was her last one. So because there was still a lot of doubt around what actually happens in the episode, I considered it semi-memorable, which again is worth minus 2 points, which leaves this episode overall as a 7 out of 10. And that brings the mostly objective ranking to in first The Fisher King, Part 2, followed by Aftermath, The Perfect Storm. This episode comes in 4th, The Boogeyman, followed by P911, and Psychodrama in 6th place. So my personal ranking for this episode, much like the last one, I did find that it engaged my attention. It had a lot of character development because it is Elle's last episode. There was an entire subplot focused on her, completely separate from the case and what she was going through. So that was obviously very interesting. One thing about like the multi-episode, like the multi-season supporting characters, these are characters that you get to know each week. And while in shows like this one, they don't do too much personal development, at least they haven't so far. When there is personal development, I greatly enjoy that because these are the characters you're meant to get attached to because they're the ones that carry on into every episode. So I did really like that they went more into what she had going on, and then ultimately she does end up quitting in this episode, which is a major development. So again, that gains some personal points for me. The uniqueness of the concept, it being like a child killing other children, the fact that the killer is even a child to begin with, we haven't seen that before, um, especially a child like that young. So I think that that was part of what made it semi-memorable is the fact that it was such a unique concept. One of the children is going to recur in a later episode. Um, we got a few fun facts about some of the characters, which, again, we haven't gotten too many of those throughout the series. Like every so often, they'll sprinkle one in every few episodes. So I do like when they do that because it, makes the characters a little bit more like real people, not just like procedural people going through the procedures, you know, less, what am I trying to say? Less untouchable, no, ro like they're not robotic, they have emotions, obviously, but like they kind of are just uniform people going through the crime-solving procedures. When you learn little fun facts about their personality, about their lives outside of the job, things like that, it makes them more like real people and characters that you want to root for because you're starting to get to know them. That's essentially what I mean. Um, so overall, I liked all of those aspects of the episode, unique concept, everything. I also like the small town vibes. I love the wooding, the woods as like a setting, one of my favorite settings for shows, regardless of what style of show it is, whether it's a drama, whether it's a crime show, whether it's even like an anime or a fantasy show or anything like that. Woods, forests, probably my favorite setting. So really liked the vibes of this episode, just for the setting as well. And in this case, as always, its main flaw was really the child acting, and it's not the children's fault. But, most everyday ordinary children do not go through significant traumas. They also do not have a lot of life experience to be able to adequately fake a trauma that they've never experienced. As such, a lot of child acting comes off as stiff or unrealistic or just there's a disconnect there. It does not seem real. Like they can't sell it like adults do, I should say. And that's no fault to them. But a lot of times when there's a lot of children actors, I'm kind of like, meh. The only reason I think it did kind of work in this episode is that the children actors were pretty much just interacting with each other for the most part. And so that gave it a little bit more realism because even if they were awkward, they were all equally awkward. So it kind of disguised the awkwardness of the acting. And therefore, I think it did do well for that reason. So even then, I didn't take much points for it, like on the personal side of things. And ultimately, I decided to give it a 9 out of 10. I didn't like it as much as the last episode, but because of so much stuff happening, so many new things being learned about the characters, even the uniqueness of the concept, like I couldn't give it any lower than a 9. There wasn't even anything I really greatly disliked, just some, like I said, awkward acting from the child actors. I did feel like Morgan was a little bit rude when he was interviewing the father, but that's only because I knew the father was innocent at the time. So I was kind of like, well, yeah, you're being pretty mean to an innocent person, but he didn't know that at the time. And if it was your first time watching the episode, you probably didn't know that. So the rudeness probably wouldn't have stood out as much. but he was like really cruel in some of the things he was saying, and I'm like, he's not the bad guy, stop. But either way, 9 out of 10. Bringing the personal ranking to Aftermath, The Boogeyman in second, then Psychodrama, The Fisher King 2, The Perfect Storm, and P911 in last place. Which brings us to the series ranking. Season 1 is first on both lists. Mostly objective ranking for season 2 so far is 34 out of 230. And on the personal ranking, we're quite a bit ahead at 47 out of 230. But with that, we have now rewatched and ranked Criminal Minds Season 2, Episode 6, The Boogeyman. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.